Story 1. Benny Eddie Demps was born on June 17, 1950. He was born in the state of Florida. His family was poor. He was a black male. He grew up in a time when there was still a lot of racial separation in the South. His parents worked hard, but did not have much money. Benny went to school like other children, but he did not like school very much. He often got into trouble with his teachers. He was not a bad child, but he had a hard time following rules. He would talk back to adults. He would get into small fights with other boys. By the time he was a teenager, Benny stopped caring about school. He started spending time with older boys who were also in trouble. They would skip classes. They would hang out on the streets. Benny did not finish high school. He left school before he could graduate. When he was old enough, Benny decided to join the United States Marine Corps. He wanted to get away from his neighborhood. He also wanted to learn discipline. The Marines trained him to be a soldier. He learned how to use weapons. He learned how to follow orders. He was sent to fight in the Vietnam War. The war was very hard on Benny. He saw terrible things. He had to fight in dangerous conditions. When he came back home to Florida, he was not the same person. He had trouble sleeping. He had trouble keeping a job. He felt angry a lot of the time. He did not talk much about what he saw in the war, but his family could tell that something had changed inside him. After leaving the military, Benny tried to live a normal life. He looked for work. He tried to make friends, but he could not hold a job for very long. He would get into arguments with his bosses. He would stop showing up for work. He started drinking alcohol more often. He also started using drugs. Benny began to commit small crimes. He would steal things from stores. He would break into cars. He would fight with people on the street. He was arrested a few times for these small offenses. He spent some short periods in jail, but each time he got out, he went back to the same behavior. He met a man named Jackie Hardy. Jackie was also a criminal. He was also from Florida. Jackie and Benny became friends. They started committing crimes together. They would steal money and property. They did not have real jobs. They survived by taking what did not belong to them. Benny did not have a stable home. He moved from place to place. He did not have a wife or children at this time. He spent most of his time with other criminals. They would talk about big plans to get rich. They would talk about robbing places. Benny became more and more used to breaking the law. By the year 1971, Benny Demps was 21 years old. He had no education. He had no job. He had no future that looked bright. He had a criminal record from small offenses. He had a friend named Jackie Hardy, who was just like him. They were both angry. They were both willing to do dangerous things to get money. One day, Benny and Jackie stole a safe. They took it to a place where they thought they could open it alone. They went to an orange grove in Lake County, Florida. The orange grove was far from other people. They thought no one would see them there. They brought tools to break open the safe. Benny Demps and Jackie Hardy were in the orange grove in Lake County, Florida. They had a stolen safe with them. They were trying to open it. They did not want anyone to see them. They thought the grove was a good hiding place. While they were working on the safe, 3 people came into the grove. The first was a man named R.N. Brinkworth. He was a real estate agent. He was showing land to a couple from Connecticut. The couple was Celia Pulick and her husband Nicholas Pulick. They were looking for a place to retire. All 3 walked into the grove to look at the property. They did not know that Demps and Hardy were there. Demps and Hardy saw the 3 people. They became scared. They thought the 3 people would tell the police about the stolen safe. So Demps and Hardy decided to stop them. They pulled out guns. They ordered the 3 people to give them money. The victims handed over several $100s. Then Demps and Hardy forced all 3 victims into the trunk of a car. The victims were locked inside the dark trunk. They were scared. They tried to get out. They pushed on the trunk lid. They made noise. They wanted to escape. When Demps and Hardy heard the victims trying to get out, they made a decision. They picked up a rifle. They shot into the trunk of the car multiple times. Celia Pulick was hit and killed. R.N. Brinkworth was hit and killed. Nicholas Pulick was also shot, but he did not die. He survived his wounds. He was the only one who lived. The two killers then left the scene. They got into the stolen car and drove away from Florida. They drove north. They crossed state lines. They ended up in New Jersey. A highway patrolman stopped them for speeding. The officer asked to see proof of ownership for the car. Demps pretended to look inside the car. Then he opened the trunk. The officer saw a weapon inside the trunk. At the same time, another passenger dropped a pistol on the ground. The officer arrested Demps and Hardy. Back in Florida, Nicholas Pulick survived his injuries. He was able to talk to the police. He told them what happened. He identified Benny Demps and Jackie Hardy as the two men who shot them. That identification became key evidence. Demps and Hardy were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. They went to trial. They were convicted. The judge sentenced both of them to death in the electric chair. But then a big change happened. In 1972, the United States Supreme Court made a decision in a case called Furman v. Georgia. The court said that the death penalty laws were not fair. Many death sentences across the country were changed to life in prison. Benny Demps was one of those people. His death sentence was commuted. That means it was reduced to a double life sentence. He was sent to prison to serve life for the 2 murders. Demps arrived at Florida State Prison. He was an inmate there. He did not accept his situation quietly. Prison records show that between 1973 and 1977, Demps had 14 disciplinary reports. He was written up for fighting 3 times. He was also written up for scalding another inmate with hot water. Prison staff saw him as a troublemaker. He was part of a group of inmates who called themselves Perjury Incorporated. This was a prison gang. Their goal was to find and punish inmates who were informants or snitches. In September 1976, a new inmate was at Florida State Prison. His name was Alfred Sturgis. He was 23 years old. He was a black male. Sturgis was serving a life sentence for a murder he committed outside of prison. Inside the prison, other inmates believed Sturgis was a snitch. They believed he told prison staff information about other prisoners. On September 6, 1976, prison staff found Alfred Sturgis in his cell. He was bleeding very badly. He had multiple stab wounds. The guards rushed him to the prison hospital. Then they sent him to another hospital. Finally, they took him to Shands Teaching Hospital in Gainesville. He was in bad condition. While Sturgis was being taken to the hospital in an ambulance, a correctional officer named A.V. Roden was with him. Sturgis reached up and grabbed Roden's hand. Sturgis said he did not think he would live. Roden told him to hold on. Roden asked Sturgis to name the people who attacked him. Sturgis then said these words, "You have to get Mungan and Demps. They held me and Jackson stabbed me." Roden asked which Jackson. Sturgis said, "Toothless Jackson." That statement became known as a dying declaration. Sturgis died from his wounds soon after arriving at the hospital. The 3 inmates named by Sturgis were Benny Demps, James Jackson, and Harry Mungan. Jackson was called Toothless Jackson because he had missing teeth. Mungan was another inmate. All 3 were part of the prison gang that targeted informants. Another inmate named Larry Hathaway saw part of the attack. Hathaway testified later about what he saw. He said he was walking past Mungan's cell. Mungan told him to go downstairs and stay there. Mungan said he was fixing to get rid of a snitch. Hathaway left but came back a short time later. He saw a struggle in Sturgis' cell. Mungan was standing in the doorway. Inside, Hathaway saw Demps holding Sturgis down on the bed. He saw Jackson stabbing Sturgis with a homemade knife. The knife was made inside the prison. After seeing this, Hathaway left the area quickly. The murder happened on September 6, 1976. This was only 2 months after Florida had brought back the death penalty. The state had written a new law that the U.S. Supreme Court accepted. So prosecutors now had a way to seek the death penalty again for Demps. Prison officials started an investigation. A chief prison inspector named Cecil L. Sewell wrote a report on September 7, 1976. That report said that before Sturgis died, he named James Jackson as his attacker. The report did not name Demps. That report would become very important many years later. But at the time of the crime, the investigators kept gathering evidence. A follow-up report included the full dying declaration that named Demps, Jackson, and Mungin. The 3 inmates were charged with the murder of Alfred Sturgis. The state prepared to try them. Demps was already serving a double life sentence for the 1971 murders. The new charge was first-degree murder. The trial for the murder of Alfred Sturgis began in 1978. The prosecutor was a man named Thomas Elwell. He was an assistant district attorney for Bradford County. The case was heard in the Circuit Court for the 8th Judicial Circuit in Florida. The prosecution presented its evidence step by step. First, they called Correctional Officer A.V. Roden to the witness stand. Roden told the jury what Sturgis said in the ambulance before he died. He repeated Sturgis' words, "You have to get Mungin and Demps. They held me and Jackson stabbed me." The jury heard this dying declaration. The law allows dying declarations as evidence because the person believed they were about to die. Next, the prosecution called inmate Larry Hathaway. Hathaway told the jury what he saw. He said he saw Mungin standing at the door. He saw Demps holding Sturgis down on the bed. He saw Jackson stabbing Sturgis with a homemade knife. Hathaway admitted he left the area quickly because he was scared. The defense lawyers tried to show that Hathaway was not a reliable witness. They wanted to tell the jury that Hathaway was a homosexual. They wanted to argue that Hathaway was promised favors in exchange for his testimony. Specifically, they believed Hathaway wanted to be transferred to a different prison where his friend Robert Ziegler was housed. But the trial judge stopped the defense from talking about Hathaway's sexuality. The judge said that information was inflammatory and not relevant. The judge did allow some questions about whether Hathaway and Ziegler were real good friends. But that was all. The defense also asked the prosecution to produce a written report from Officer Roden. Roden had written down Sturgis' statement after the ambulance ride, but the state said the report was lost. An investigator named R.K. Griffiths had misplaced it. The defense asked the judge to dismiss the case because the state lost this evidence. The judge refused to dismiss the case. The trial continued. The jury heard all the evidence. They also knew that Demps had already been convicted of 2 murders in 1971. That fact was allowed to be presented because it showed Demps had a history of violent crime. After listening to everything, the jury went to deliberate. They could not agree at first. The jury was hung, but they kept working. Finally, they reached a verdict. The jury found Benny Demps guilty of first-degree murder for killing Alfred Sturgis. They also found James Jackson and Harry Mungin guilty of the same crime. Then came the sentencing phase. The jury was asked to recommend whether each man should get life in prison or death. For Demps, the jury recommended death. For Jackson, they also recommended death. For Mungin, they recommended life. The trial judge, Wayne Carlisle, then made the final decision. He sentenced James Jackson to life in prison, not death. He sentenced Harry Mungin to life. But he sentenced Benny Demps to death. The judge cited Demps' previous murder convictions as a major reason for giving him the death penalty. Jackson and Mungin did not have prior murder convictions. Demps was sent back to death row at Florida State Prison. He would spend the next 22 years there. He did not stop fighting his case. Over the years, Demps filed many appeals. In 1981, the Florida Supreme Court reviewed his case. They upheld his conviction and death sentence. Demps also had 3 death warrants signed against him before. One was in 1982. Another was in 1987. Another was in 1990. Each time, he got a last-minute stay of execution. In 1987, he came within 13 hours of being executed. His head and leg had already been shaved for the electric chair electrodes. But a court stopped the execution. During these years, Demps and his lawyers kept looking for evidence that could prove he was innocent of Sturgis murder. In 1998, while preparing for a clemency investigation, Demps' lawyer Bill Salmon received a large number of documents from the state. There were between 2,000 and 3,000 pages. Among those pages was a one-page memo written on September 7, 1976. The memo was written by Cecil L. Sewell, the chief prison inspector. It was addressed to Louis Wainwright, the secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections. The memo said that before Sturgis died, he named James Jackson as his attacker. The memo did not name Benny Demps at all. Demps and his lawyers said this memo had been hidden for 22 years. They said the state never gave it to the defense before the trial. They argued that this was proof Demps was not named by Sturgis. They filed a new appeal in 1999. They asked the court to hold an evidentiary hearing. An evidentiary hearing is a court hearing where new evidence can be presented. The judge in Bradford County Circuit Court agreed that the claim had merit. He ordered the state to respond by January 15, 2000. The state responded. They said the Sewell memo was only a preliminary report. They said it was not the final investigation. They also said the information in the memo was hearsay. That means Sewell did not hear Sturgis say it himself. The state argued that Sturgis' dying declaration to Officer Roden was the correct and final statement. They also pointed out that the jury had already heard the evidence and convicted Demps. The Florida Supreme Court agreed with the state. On June 5, 2000, the court ruled 7-0 against Demps. They said the memo did not require a new trial. Despite this, Demps continued to claim he was innocent. His wife Tracy, whom he married on death row in 1999, wrote letters and tried to get attention for his case. Pope John Paul II sent a letter to Florida Governor Jeb Bush asking for clemency. But Governor Bush did not stop the execution. On April 24, 2000, Governor Bush signed Demps' fourth death warrant. The execution was scheduled for May 31, 2000. Demps' lawyers asked for more time because one lawyer's wife had lung surgery. The Florida Supreme Court gave a one-week delay. The new execution date was set for June 7, 2000 at 6 p.m. On the day of the execution, Demps was allowed to see his wife. They hugged and kissed. He was served a last meal. He ate barbecue chicken and beef, French fries, salad, Spanish rice rolls, cherry vanilla ice cream, butter pecan ice cream, a mango, banana pudding, and Pepsi. He only ate half of it. At 6 p.m., the execution team began preparing Demps for lethal injection. He was taken to the execution chamber. He was laid on a gurney. The team tried to insert 2 intravenous needles into his veins. One needle went into his left arm properly, but the team had trouble finding a second vein. They had to perform a surgical procedure. They cut him in the groin area. Then they cut his leg. He bled a lot. The wounds were stitched closed. The process took 33 minutes longer than expected. When the curtains opened so witnesses could see, Demps spoke for 7 minutes. His voice was shaking. He said, "They butchered me back there. I was in a lot of pain." He said they cut him in the groin and leg. He said, "This is not an execution. This is murder." He said he was an innocent man. He said the state had knowingly fabricated evidence against him. He also spoke to Governor Bush. He said, "Governor Bush, you have done what you said you would never do, and that is kill an innocent man." He ended by saying he left the world hating no man, and with no malice toward anyone. He spoke a short Muslim prayer. He had converted to Islam 10 years earlier. He wore a white kufi on his head. After his statement, the lethal chemicals were injected. His eyes closed. He appeared to stop breathing at 6:42 p.m. He was pronounced dead at 6:53 p.m. on June 7, 2000. He was 49 years old. Benietti Demps was the 47th person executed in Florida since the state resumed executions in 1979. He was the 641st person executed in the United States since 1976. His co-defendants, James Jackson and Harry Mungan, both remained in prison serving life sentences. His former partner in the 1971 murders, Jackie Hardy, died in prison on January 26, 1999. The victims of the 1971 Orange Grove murders were R.N. Brinkworth and Celia Pulick. Nicholas Pulick survived his wounds. The victim of the 1976 prison murder was Alfred Sturgis, whose dying declaration led to the convictions of his 3 attackers. The story of Benietti Demps ends with his death by lethal injection on June 7, 2000, after more than 2 decades on death row. Story 2. Roger James Burgett was born on November 20, 1960 in Oklahoma. He was a white male. His parents were married, but the family did not have a stable or happy home. When Roger was about 9 or 10 years old, his father became very angry with him. The father told Roger to leave the house and never come back. Roger was still a child. He had no money and no place to go. After his father kicked him out, Roger found an abandoned house near where his family lived. The house was empty and broken down. No one else lived there. Roger moved into that abandoned house by himself. He was only 9 or 10 years old. Even though Roger could not live at home, his mother still cared about him. Every day, she would bring him meals. She walked to the abandoned house with food so Roger could eat. Roger survived because his mother secretly helped him. One day, Roger's father found out what the mother was doing. He learned that she was bringing food to Roger in the abandoned house. The father became very angry. He went to the abandoned house. He beat Roger. Then he beat the mother as well. After beating them both, the father set fire to the abandoned house. He burned it down. Roger lost the only shelter he had. He had nowhere left to live after that. Not much else is known about Roger's teenage years. He did not finish school with a strong record. He got into trouble with the law as a young adult. He was convicted of felonies that involved violence or the threat of violence. He spent time in prison before he turned 25 years old. By the time Roger was in his mid-20s, he had already been in and out of trouble. He had a girlfriend at some point. He also had a son that he said he loved. But his life did not have a steady job or a safe home. He moved around. He knew other people who also broke the law. One of the people Roger knew was a man named Michael Smith. Another was a man named Scott Thornton. Roger spent time with these men. They were not law-abiding people. Roger was still living in Oklahoma during this period of his life. In October 1985, Roger was 24 years old. He was not working as a teacher or a professional. He did not have a regular daily routine. He was looking for ways to get money or things he wanted without working for them. He had access to a gun. Roger also knew another man named James Meadows from Hughes County, near a town called Holdenville. That relationship would later become important, but at this point in the story, nothing had happened yet between them. Roger continued to live his life day by day. He did not plan to change his behavior. He stayed around people who committed crimes. He carried a weapon even though he was a felon and was not allowed to have one. He was not afraid to use force to get what he wanted. At the age of 24, Roger Burgett was a high school dropout with a criminal record, violent tendencies, and no stable home. He had friends who were also criminals. He had a gun. He had no job. He had no reason to stop breaking the law. That was the state of Roger Burgett's life in the middle of October 1985. On October 19, 1985, Roger Burgett was with his friend Michael Smith. Both men wanted to go riding around in a car. Neither of them had a car of their own to use, so they decided to steal a car from someone. Roger and Michael went to a supermarket parking lot in Oklahoma City. The supermarket was a place where people shopped for food. Many cars were in the lot. The two men waited and watched people walking to their cars. They saw a man walking toward a car. The man's name was Rick Lee Patterson. He was 33 years old. Rick was a math teacher at a middle school called Moore Central Mid-High. He had just finished shopping, or was about to leave. He did not know that two men were watching him. Rick reached his car and opened the door. At that moment, Roger Burgett moved fast. He pulled out a gun and pointed it at Rick. Roger forced Rick to slide over to the passenger side of the car. Rick did not fight back because he was afraid of the gun. Michael Smith then got into the back seat of the car. He sat behind Rick Patterson. Roger Burgett got into the driver's seat. Roger now controlled the car. Rick Patterson could not escape because Roger had the gun and Michael was behind him. Roger drove the car away from the supermarket parking lot. He drove to a part of town that was empty and quiet. There were no people around to see what was happening. When they reached that deserted area, Roger and Michael tied Rick's hands. They also put tape or cloth over his mouth so he could not scream. Then they opened the trunk of the car. They forced Rick Patterson into the trunk. They closed the trunk lid on top of him. Rick was now locked in the dark trunk of his own car. He could not move his hands well, and he could not call for help. Roger got back into the driver's seat. He drove east on Interstate 40. He was looking for a place that was even more isolated. He wanted a spot where no one would find them. He drove until he found a wooded area near the interstate and a road called Rockwell. The area had trees and was away from houses. Roger stopped the car. He and Michael got out and opened the trunk. When they opened the trunk, they saw that Rick Patterson had freed his hands. Rick had managed to work the ties loose while he was inside the trunk. He was still alive and still in the trunk. Roger and Michael did not let him go. They grabbed Rick and tied his hands again, this time behind his back. They made him stand up next to a tree. Rick could not run. He could not use his hands to defend himself. He was standing next to the tree with his back to the men. Then Michael Smith took a shotgun. He pointed it at Rick Patterson and fired one shot. The shotgun blast hit Rick. He fell to the ground. But Roger and Michael looked at him and saw that he was still moving. They were afraid that Rick was still alive. They feared he might crawl away or survive and later tell the police what had happened. So a second shot was fired. The second shot was also from the shotgun. It hit Rick Patterson again. After the second shot, Rick stopped moving. He was dead. The two men had killed him. Roger and Michael did not stay at the scene. They left Rick Patterson's body lying in the wooded area next to the tree. Then they drove away in Rick's car. 3 days later, on October 22nd, 1985, the car was found. It was in a field near Tulsa, which is a different city in Oklahoma. The car had been set on fire. Someone had burned it so that evidence would be destroyed. The car was badly damaged from the fire. The next day, October 21st, 1985, two hunters were walking in the wooded area near Interstate 40 and Rockwell. They were looking for animals to hunt. Instead, they found a body on the ground. The body was a white male. He had been shot. The hunters called the police. The police identified the body as Rick Lee Patterson, the missing math teacher. At the time of the murder, Roger Burgett did not know that the body had been found. He went on with his life. He continued to commit other crimes. He also killed another man named James Meadows in Hughes County, near the town of Holdenville. That killing happened separately from Rick Patterson's murder. The method and exact date of James Meadows' death were not written down in the public records the same way, but Roger admitted later that he had killed Meadows as well. Between October 1985 and August 1986, no one arrested Roger for Rick Patterson's murder. The The police did not know who had killed the teacher. They had a body in a burned car, but they did not have suspects yet. Roger Burgett was still free. He did not tell anyone what he had done, except for a few people he bragged to. He mentioned the killing to others. Those people remembered what he said. Michael Smith also told someone about the murder. He told a man named Donald Gene Wheeler that Smith had shot first, and then Burgett had fired the second shot. Smith explained that they did this so that neither man could later tell on the other. If both fired a shot, they were both guilty. That way, they could not be witnesses against each other. Roger Burgett also told Scott Thornton about the murder at some point. Thornton knew what had happened. But in August 1986, none of these witnesses had yet gone to the police with their information. The case was still unsolved. Rick Patterson's family did not know who had killed him. Roger Burgett continued to live as a free man, committing more burglaries and carrying a gun. After the hunters found Rick Patterson's body on October 21, 1985, the police began asking questions. They did not know who had killed him. They had no suspects for many months. The burned car found near Tulsa on October 24th gave them some clues, but not enough to make an arrest. Nearly 1 year passed. Then in August 1986, police in Del City and Midwest City arrested Roger Burgett. He was 25 years old at that time. The arrest was not for murder. The police arrested him for robbery and burglary. These were separate crimes he had committed after killing Rick Patterson. While Roger was in custody for the robbery and burglary charges, the police started to connect him to the Patterson murder. They asked him questions. On August 13, 1986, Roger confessed to the police. He admitted that he helped Michael Smith abduct Rick Patterson. He also admitted that he took part in the murder. But in his confession, Roger said that Michael Smith was the one who fired the shotgun. The police also arrested Scott Thornton around the same time on robbery and burglary charges. Thornton agreed to testify against Roger in exchange for a promise. The promise was that Thornton would serve a 25-year prison sentence outside of Oklahoma. He would not have to stay in Oklahoma prisons. Because of this deal, Thornton became a witness for the prosecution. Another witness came forward. His name was Donald Gene Wheeler. He told the police that Michael Smith had bragged about the murder. According to Wheeler, Smith said that he shot first, and then Burgett fired the second shot. Smith explained that they did this so neither man could betray the other to the police. Roger Burgett was formally charged with first-degree murder for killing Rick Patterson. Michael Smith was also charged with the same murder. At the time of his arrest, Smith was already serving a prison sentence for a forgery conviction. In late 1986 or early 1987, the prosecutor made Roger an offer. The prosecutor said that if Roger pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and agreed to testify against Michael Smith, the state would not seek the death penalty against Roger. Instead, Roger would receive a life prison sentence. The offer was for 6 consecutive life sentences, which meant Roger would never get out of prison, but he would not be executed. Roger initially agreed to this deal, but then something changed. While in jail, Roger was placed in the same facility as Michael Smith. The two men met. After that meeting, Roger changed his mind. He decided he would not testify against Smith. Instead, he told his lawyer that he would accept full responsibility for the murder himself. Some people who knew the case believed Roger was afraid of what Smith might do to him if he testified. On January 23, 1987, Roger Burgett went to court. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He also pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree burglary and 1 count of being a felon in possession of a firearm. The burglary charges came from the separate crimes he committed after the murder. The firearm charge came from him having a gun, even though he had prior felony convictions. After his guilty plea, a judge held a sentencing hearing. The judge heard evidence about why Roger should live or die. The state presented 4 reasons, called aggravating circumstances, why the death penalty was appropriate. These were: the murder was done to avoid arrest. Roger had prior violent felony convictions. He would be a continuing threat to society, and the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Roger's lawyer presented evidence to try to save his life. This evidence included Roger's unhappy childhood, the love he felt for his son, and the fact that he could behave well in prison. After hearing everything, the judge decided that the aggravating factors were stronger than the mitigating factors. On March 12, 1987, the judge sentenced Roger Burgett to death. For the burglary counts, Roger received life in prison. For the firearm charge, he received 10 years. Those shorter sentences did not matter because the death sentence was the one that would be carried out. After the judge sentenced him to death, Roger changed his mind again. He asked to withdraw his guilty plea. He wanted to have a trial instead. The judge said no. The plea would stand. Roger then testified at Michael Smith's trial. In that testimony, Roger said something completely different from his earlier confession. He told the court that Michael Smith was not even present when the murder happened. The jurors did not believe Roger. They found Smith guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death as well. But Smith's case did not end the same way. In 1992, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals gave Smith a new trial. The court found that several errors had happened in Smith's original trial. Before the new trial could begin, Smith made a deal. He agreed to plead guilty to first-degree murder. In exchange, the prosecutor agreed to a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 1995, a judge gave Smith that sentence. Smith was not executed. While in prison, Smith killed another inmate, stabbed a guard, and stabbed another inmate. He received more life sentences for those crimes. Roger Burgett, meanwhile, stayed on death row. He did not get a single disciplinary write-up during his time on death row. He behaved well in prison. Roger appealed his case. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed his guilty plea and sentence. In 1991, the court issued a decision. The court affirmed the conviction and the death sentence. That meant the sentence was valid and could be carried out. Roger asked for clemency. A clemency hearing was held on May 30, 2000, before the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board. Roger's lawyer presented his difficult childhood and the fact that Smith received life while Roger faced death. Members of Rick Patterson's family spoke about their pain and loss. At the end of the hearing, Roger was brought into the room in chains. He whispered with his lawyer. Then his lawyer announced that Roger no longer wished to make a presentation. The board voted 3-1 against recommending clemency. The governor did not stop the execution. On June 8, 2000, Roger James Burgett was executed at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. The method was lethal injection. He was 39 years old. He was asked if he had a final statement. He said, "No, sir." The curtain went up at 12:08 a.m. He was pronounced dead at 12:12 a.m. Rick Patterson's family attended the execution. His sister said it was easy, way too easy, compared to how her brother died. His brother said Roger had a smile on his face when he closed his eyes. The family said they received only partial closure because Michael Smith was not executed. Roger Burgett became the 8th person executed in Oklahoma in 2000 and the 27th since the state resumed executions in 1990. The story of Roger Burgett ends with his death by lethal injection, while Rick Patterson's family continues to live with the loss of a beloved teacher and brother who brought laughter into their lives. Story 3. Thomas Wayne Mason was born on December 31, 1951. Nobody knows exactly where he was born, but he grew up in the southern United States. His family was not rich. They lived a simple life. When Thomas was a young man, he learned to work with his hands. He became a drywall installer. This meant he would go into houses that were being built and put up the walls. He did this job for many years. He worked in places like Dallas, Texas, and later in Tennessee. Thomas got married for the first time to a woman named Billy Jones. They had a daughter together. The daughter's name was Tabitha. At first, they lived as a normal family. But over time, Thomas began to act in angry and controlling ways. Billy later said that Thomas beat her during their marriage. She said he hit her even when she was pregnant with their daughter. He also tried to stop her from seeing her own family. He wanted her to stay away from her parents and other relatives. In 1973, Billy decided she could not stay with Thomas anymore. She took their daughter Tabitha and moved into her parents' home. She wanted to be safe. Thomas did not like this. He tried to get Billy to come back to him. When she said no, he pulled out a gun. He took Tabitha away from Billy. He kept the little girl for about 2 weeks. Later, Thomas came back to Billy's parents' house. Billy would not go outside to see him. So Thomas left and came back a few hours later without Tabitha. Then he kicked in the back door of the house. He pulled a telephone out of the wall. Then he started shooting a gun inside the house. Billy's uncle shot back at Thomas and hit him. Thomas was hurt, but he did not die. After this, Billy did not see her daughter Tabitha again for 14 years. Thomas later married a second time. His second wife's name was Melinda. They lived together as husband and wife. But again, problems started. Melinda later said that Thomas beat her during their marriage. He also threatened to kill her. He tried to keep her away from her own family, just like he had done with Billy. Melinda wanted to see her mother and grandmother. Her mother's name was Marcia Brock. Her grandmother's name was Sybil Mares Dennis. Thomas did not like Melinda visiting them. He became angry when she spent time with her family instead of with him. Eventually, Melinda decided to leave Thomas. She separated from him. She went to live with her relatives for a short time. This made Thomas very angry. He felt that Melinda's mother and grandmother were the reason she left him. He blamed them for the marriage falling apart. In August 1991, about 2 months before the events that would come later, Thomas made a threat. He told someone that he wanted to burn down the house where Marcia Brock lived. Marcia heard about this threat. She was scared. She called the police and told them what Thomas had said. The police made a note of this. They told officers to drive by Marcia's house from time to time to check if everything was okay. Around the same time, Thomas started saying things about Melinda's family that showed he was very angry. But he had not yet done anything more than make threats. Then, on September 16, 1991, something happened. Thomas went to a place called the Lake June Athletic Club. This was next to a business school where Melinda was taking classes. Thomas had a gun with him. He found Melinda and confronted her. He held the gun to her face. He told her he was going to kill her and then himself. But first, he said, he wanted to make love to her. For 5.5 hours, Thomas kept Melinda in a room at the athletic club. During that time, he forced her to do sex acts with him. He kept telling her he would kill her. Police arrived. A SWAT team came. There were about 20 police units outside. The media also came to report on what was happening. Finally, Melinda convinced Thomas to let her go. She promised she would get back together with him. He believed her and let her go. He was arrested after this standoff, but he was not kept in jail for a long time. After this event, Melinda did not go back to Thomas. She stayed away from him. This made Thomas even angrier. He still blamed her mother and grandmother for the separation. He thought that if they were not in the way, Melinda would come back to him. Thomas continued to work as a drywall installer. He moved between Texas and Tennessee. He kept a gun, or could get one when he wanted. He thought about what he wanted to do next. He did not tell many people his plans, but his anger was growing inside him. He believed that Melinda's family was the cause of all his problems. Thomas Wayne Mason made a decision. He decided to travel from his home in Tennessee to Texas. He wanted to hurt Marcia Brock and Sybil Mares Dennis. He blamed them for his separation from Melinda. He believed that if they were gone, his problems would be solved. On October 2nd, 1991, Thomas got into his vehicle. He drove from Tennessee to East Texas. This was a long drive. He had a plan in his mind. He knew what he wanted to do. He did not tell anyone his full plan before he left. When he arrived in East Texas, he went to a pawn shop. A pawn shop is a store where people can buy used items. Thomas walked into the shop. He looked at the guns they had for sale. He chose a 12-gauge shotgun. This is a powerful gun that shoots many small pellets at once. It can cause a lot of damage to a person's body. He also bought 3 boxes of buckshot ammunition. Buckshot means large metal pellets meant for hunting big animals. At the pawn shop, Thomas had to fill out a federal firearms form. This is a paper that asks for the buyer's name and address. On this form, Thomas wrote an address. He wrote 113 Robinwood Street, White House, Texas. That was not his own address. He did not live there. That was the address where Marcia Brock and Sybil Mares Dennis lived. He wrote their address as his own. He did this so the paper would not lead back to him in Tennessee. After buying the shotgun and the ammunition, Thomas went to another pawn shop. He spoke to the owner. He told the owner that he needed a shotgun to hunt with. Then he said something strange. He said he was only going to use the gun one time. The owner did not know what Thomas meant, but Thomas already knew exactly what he planned to do. Thomas then drove to the town of White House, Texas. He found the street where Marcia and Sybil lived. The address was 113 Robinwood Street. It was a house. Thomas did not go to the house right away. Instead, he went to a restaurant called Chicken and Burgers. This restaurant was 1 or 2 blocks away from the house. He sat there and waited. He was watching the street. He was waiting for Marcia Brock to come home from her work. A woman named Rebecca Fauché was working at Chicken and Burgers that day. She saw Thomas sitting there. Later, she saw him leave very quickly. He drove over a grassy area. He ran past a stop sign without stopping. Then he turned onto Robinwood Street. He did this because he had seen Marcia's car approaching. Marcia Brock had finished her work for the day. She drove home. She arrived at 113 Robinwood Street. She got out of her car and went inside her house. She did not know that Thomas was watching her. She did not know he had a shotgun in his vehicle. Thomas followed her. He drove down Robinwood Street. He parked or stopped near the house. He took the shotgun. He went to the front door of the house. He entered the house. He did not knock. He did not ask permission. He just went inside. Marcia Brock saw Thomas come in. Before she could run or hide, Thomas raised the shotgun. He pointed it at her head. He was very close to her. He pulled the trigger. The shotgun fired. The buckshot hit Marcia in the head. The force was so strong that her skull was blown apart. Pieces of her skull and brain matter were found in different parts of the house. Marcia fell to the floor. She was dead instantly. Thomas did not stop. There was another person in the house. Sybil Mares Dennis was Marcia's mother. She was 80 years old. She was in another part of the house. She heard the gunshot. She knew something terrible was happening. She tried to call for help. Sybil picked up the telephone. She dialed 911. This is the emergency number in the United States. A woman named Teresa Autry was working as a dispatcher for the White House Police Department. She answered the call, but Sybil did not speak right away. The call came through as a hang-up. Teresa Autry called the number back. When Teresa called back, someone answered. It was Sybil. Teresa heard an elderly woman scream. The woman screamed, "Help me! Help me! Help me!" She screamed 3 times. Then Teresa heard a loud bang or a crash. Then she heard a man's voice. The man said, "Hang up the phone." Then Teresa heard the phone being dropped. Then she heard a woman moaning and whimpering. Then the line went dead. What happened during that phone call was this. Thomas found Sybil trying to get help. He aimed a shotgun at her. He fired the first shot. The buckshot went through her right forearm. Then it entered her chest. The force knocked Sybil to the ground. But she was not dead yet. She was on the floor, hurt badly. Thomas did not stop. He walked closer to her. He fired another round into her side. This second shot killed her. Sybil Mares Dennis died on the floor of her home. The broken telephone was found near her body. After killing both women, Thomas left the house. He did not call for help. He did not try to hide the bodies. He simply left. He got back into his vehicle. He drove away from Robinwood Street. He left Texas and started driving back toward Tennessee. The dispatcher, Teresa Autry, after hearing the screaming and the gunshot sounds, sent a police officer to the house. The officer's name was Jim Gill. He drove to 113 Robinwood Street. When he arrived, he saw the house. He remembered something. There was a check-in passing notice on this address. That meant police were supposed to drive by and check on the people who lived there. The notice had been put in place on August 14, 1991, after Marcia reported that Thomas threatened to burn the house down. Officer Gill went inside. He found the bodies of Marcia Brock and Sybil Mares Dennis. He saw the shotgun wounds. He saw the broken telephone. He knew immediately that both women were dead. At the same time that police were discovering the bodies, Thomas was driving away. He did not know that the 911 call had been heard by the dispatcher. He did not know that police were already at the house. He thought he had time to escape. As he drove toward Tennessee, Thomas made a phone call. He called his nephew, Eddie Mason. He told Eddie that he had killed Melinda's mother and grandmother. He did not sound sorry. He explained what he had done. Thomas kept driving. He arrived in Tennessee the next day, October 3, 1991. He made another phone call. This time he called his daughter, Tabitha. He told her that he had committed the murders. He told her he used a 12-gauge shotgun. He called Marcia Brock his step-grandmother and Sybil Dennis his step-great-grandmother. Then he told Tabitha something else. He said he also wanted to kill 3 more people, Gary Brock, Susan Brock, and Mares Dennis. These were other relatives of Melinda. He said he wanted to kill them too. Later that same day, Thomas went to the home of his nephew Buck Mason. Buck was another relative. Thomas told Buck what he had done. Buck became worried. Buck called a cousin named Steve Bartlett. Steve Bartlett was a police officer in Memphis, Tennessee. Buck told Steve that Thomas was at his house. Buck said Thomas wanted to turn himself in for killing 2 people in Texas with a shotgun. Buck also said that the Homicide Division of the Memphis Police Department was looking for Thomas. Buck told Steve to come over alone. Steve agreed. Steve Bartlett drove to Buck's property. It was dark outside. Buck met Steve in a pasture, which is a large field of grass. They walked toward the house. When they got near the front door, Thomas came outside. He was with Buck's oldest son, Eric. Eric had also been told by Thomas about the murders. Steve Bartlett took Thomas into custody. He brought Thomas to Memphis. While the paperwork was being completed for Thomas's arrest, he said something. He laughed and said, "I don't know what the big deal is over just getting rid of a mother-in-law." He did not seem to feel any guilt or sadness. He acted as if what he had done was normal. The shotgun was found later. It was in the pasture behind Buck's house. A bag of clothing belonging to Thomas was also found there. The shotgun had blood on it. That blood matched the blood types of both Marcia Brock and Sybil Mares Dennis. The empty shotgun shells found near the victims' bodies were also tested. They matched the shotgun Thomas bought at the pawn shop on October 2, 1991. After Steve Bartlett took Thomas Wayne Mason into custody in Tennessee, the police in Texas were notified. The Memphis Police Department held Thomas while Texas authorities prepared to bring him back to Smith County, Texas. The investigation in Texas had already started at the crime scene on Robinwood Street. The White House Police Department worked with other law enforcement agencies. They collected all the physical evidence from the house. They took photographs of the bodies and the rooms. They marked where the shotgun shells fell. They measured the distance from where the shots were fired. They also took the broken telephone as evidence. The shotgun that was found in the pasture in Tennessee was sent to a crime lab. Experts tested the blood scrapings from the gun. They confirmed that the blood matched Marcia Brock and Sybil Mares Dennis. They also test-fired the shotgun. They compared the test shells to the empty shells found next to the victims' bodies. The markings matched exactly. This proved that the shotgun Thomas bought on October 2nd was the same gun used to kill both women. The police also gathered witness statements. Rebecca Fauché from the Chicken and Burgers restaurant told police what she saw. She described Thomas leaving quickly and driving toward Robinwood Street. The pawn shop owner gave police the federal firearms form that Thomas had filled out. On that form, Thomas had written the victim's address as his own. This showed that he planned the crime before he even bought the gun. The 911 call was also used as evidence. Teresa Autry, the dispatcher, wrote a report about what she heard. She described the screams, the man's voice saying, "Hang up the phone," and the woman moaning before the line went dead. This recording and her testimony helped show exactly what happened inside the house while Sybil was trying to get help. Thomas was formally charged with capital murder. The charge was for killing more than one person during the same criminal event. In Texas, this crime can lead to the death penalty. Thomas was taken back to Texas and held in the Smith County Jail. He waited for his trial. The trial began in 1992. The prosecutor was Jack Skeen, the district attorney for Smith County. Thomas pleaded not guilty. He said he did not commit the murders. His lawyers tried to defend him, but the evidence against him was very strong. During the trial, the prosecution called many witnesses. The dispatcher Teresa Autry testified about the 911 call. The police officer Jim Gill testified about finding the bodies. The crime lab experts testified about the shotgun and the blood matches. The pawn shop owner testified about selling the gun to Thomas. The restaurant worker Rebecca Fauché testified about seeing Thomas drive toward the house. The prosecution also called Thomas's daughter Tabitha. She told the court that Thomas had called her after the murders and admitted what he did. She also said that 5 days before the murders, Thomas told her he wanted to kill Marcia Brock. He said, "No, I really don't want to kill her. I just want to cripple her because I want her to remember me for the rest of her life." Tabitha also testified that later, while Thomas was in jail, he said, "I'm glad they're gone." The prosecution also brought up the armed standoff from September 16, 1991. They showed that Thomas had held Melinda at gunpoint for 5.5 hours and forced her to perform sex acts. They called police officers who responded to that event. They called Melinda herself, who testified about the abuse she suffered during her marriage and during the standoff. Thomas's first wife, Billy Jones, also testified. She told the jury about the beatings she endured. She described how Thomas took their daughter Tabitha away. She told the court about the night Thomas kicked in her parents' door and started shooting. She explained that she did not see her daughter again for 14 years because Thomas kept Tabitha away from her. On June 26, 1992, the jury found Thomas Wayne Mason guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury had to decide whether Thomas would receive life in prison or the death penalty. The prosecution presented the same evidence again. They showed that Thomas had a long history of violence, threats, and controlling behavior. They showed that he planned the murders carefully. They showed that he did not feel sorry. In fact, he laughed about killing his mother-in-law. The jury decided that Thomas should be sentenced to death. The judge agreed with the jury's decision. Thomas was sent to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. He arrived on July 14th, 1992. He was placed on death row. After his conviction, Thomas filed appeals. His lawyers tried to get his conviction overturned. First, they appealed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. That court affirmed the conviction and sentence on June 14, 1995. This meant they agreed that the trial was fair and the punishment was correct. Thomas then asked the United States Supreme Court to hear his case. The Supreme Court denied his petition on November 13, 1995. Next, Thomas filed a state habeas corpus application. This is a request to review whether his imprisonment was legal. The trial court held a hearing and recommended that relief be denied. On February 21, 1998, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals agreed and denied relief. In April 1998, Thomas filed a federal habeas corpus petition in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Texas. The district court denied relief on February 16, 1999. Thomas was not allowed to appeal that decision to a higher court. He then asked the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit to hear his case. They denied his request on December 3, 1999. He asked them to reconsider, and they denied that on February 2, 2000. Thomas tried one more time. He filed a petition with the United States Supreme Court, but the court clerk rejected the petition because it was missing an attachment. Thomas's lawyer was told to refile with the attachment, but he did not do so. This meant Thomas had no more legal options. On June 12, 2000, Thomas Wayne Mason was scheduled to be executed. He was 48 years old. He had spent 8 years on death row. Earlier that day, he met with friends and relatives. He did not ask for a last meal. The United States Supreme Court turned down his final appeal that afternoon. That evening, Thomas was taken to the execution chamber in Huntsville, Texas. He was strapped to a table. A needle was placed in his arm. Lethal injection drugs would be used to end his life. Witnesses watched through a window a few feet away. Among the witnesses were Melinda Mason, his estranged wife, and Jack Skeen, the district attorney who prosecuted him. Thomas made a final statement. He did not look at the witnesses. He stared at the ceiling. He said that the government was conspiring to murder him. He blamed Jack Skeen for his conviction. He called his trial lawyer a sellout. He accused the lawyer of working with Skeen to frame him. He said, "Jack Skeen can laugh all he wants, like he's the big hero after this is over with. Who's getting the last laugh? The guy who got away." As the drugs began to flow into his arm, Thomas said, "This stuff has a bad taste to it." Then he gasped twice and sputtered. He slipped into unconsciousness. At 6:24 p.m., he was pronounced dead. After the execution, Melinda Mason spoke to reporters. Her voice was breaking. She said, "It's been the longest 8.5 years. I'm so glad he's had justice served to him. My mom, my grandmother can rest in peace. I don't have to face the fear of this man hurting me anymore." Jack Skeen also spoke. He said, "I think of a cold-blooded, vicious, premeditated killer who got mad at his ex-wife, came to Tyler and bought a shotgun at a pawn shop, went down to White House to a little restaurant, sat there and had lunch and waited for his ex-wife's mother to drive by, then followed her home." Thomas Wayne Mason was the 20th person executed in Texas in the year 2000. He was the 643rd person executed in the United States since the death penalty was brought back in 1976. The two women he killed, Marcia Yvonne Brock and Sybil Mares Dennis, could not be brought back. But the state of Texas carried out the punishment that the jury had decided was just. The story of Thomas Wayne Mason ends with his death by lethal injection on June 12, 2000, while the memory of his victims lives on with those who loved them. Story 4. John Albert Burks was born on January 18, 1956, in Texas. He was African American. He grew up in Waco, a city in the central part of the state. His family lived on South 10th Street. This was a neighborhood in South Waco. As a child, John often went to a local boys' club. The boys' club was near a small factory that made tortillas. That factory was called Jesse's Tortilla Factory. John knew the owner of the factory, a man named Jesse Contreras, because John lived nearby. Jesse was a well-liked man in the neighborhood. At that time, John had no trouble with Jesse. He simply knew who he was. John went to school in Waco. He did not finish a college degree. As a young man, he started getting into trouble with the law. In 1977, he was convicted of burglary for the first time. Burglary means breaking into a building to steal things. He went to prison for that crime. He served about 5 months in 1978. After that, he was released on parole. Parole means he was allowed to live outside prison, but had to follow rules. In 1981, John got into another violent situation. A tow truck driver was called by the police to pick up and impound a car. After the police left, John threatened the tow truck driver. He physically attacked him. He forced the driver to unhook the car and leave it there. In 1982, John was accused of a much more serious crime. A service station attendant named Warner was sleeping at a Texaco station in Waco. Someone broke into the station and stabbed Warner to death. The police arrested John for that murder. But later, the authorities dropped the charges. They said they did not have enough evidence to convict him. So John was not punished for that death. In 1986, John was convicted of burglary again. This was his second burglary conviction. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, but he served only about 6.5 months. In 1987, he was released on parole again. So for the second time, he was out of prison but under supervision. John had family in Waco. He had a half-brother named Mark McConnell. He also had a cousin named Aaron Bilton Jr. He had aunts and uncles. One of his aunts lived in the same area. John also had a former spouse. They had been married, but by the late 1980s they were no longer together. In November 1988, John took his former spouse's van without asking. He kept it for several weeks. He returned it on December 24, 1988. When he returned it, he got into an argument with her. A man tried to step in and stop the argument. John attacked that man. Then John broke the windows of the man's car. After that, he ran from the police. Around the same time, John threatened to kill another man. That man owed John money. John told people he would kill him. He did not carry out that threat, but he made it clearly. John also asked family members for a gun. In late 1988 or early January 1989, he asked his half-brother Louis McConnell if he owned a gun or knew someone who did. Louis said no. A few weeks later, Louis came home from work. On a table he saw a small pistol and a dark stocking cap. John was in the house with other people. Louis saw John pick up the gun and walk toward the door. After John left, Louis noticed the gun was no longer in the house. John also asked other people for bullets. He went to a local grocer named Johnny Cruz and asked for .25 caliber bullets for an automatic handgun. He asked a cousin named Ike Weeks if he had any bullets. He asked a mechanic named Vincent Gillum for .25 caliber bullets. Each time, he was looking for ammunition. By early 1989, John was on parole from his 1986 burglary conviction. He was living sometimes in Waco and sometimes in Harlingen, a city in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. He did not have a steady job that was recorded. He spent time with his half-brother Mark and his cousin Aaron. He also tried to get other people to help him with something he was planning. He asked Ike Weeks to take part in a robbery, but Weeks refused. He asked other acquaintances as well, but they also turned him down. John kept talking about needing money. He told Aaron Bilton that he needed money badly. He told Aaron that he was going to do something on a Friday because a man cashed checks on Fridays. He did not say the man's name to everyone, but he had a specific place in mind. John Albert Burks had a specific target in mind. The target was Jesse Contreras. Jesse was 63 years old. He was Hispanic. He owned a small business called Jesse's Tortilla Factory. The factory was located on Webster Avenue in Waco, Texas. Jesse worked there most days. He cashed checks for customers on Fridays. That meant he had more money in the store on Fridays. John knew this because he had grown up in the neighborhood. He knew Jesse was a good man, but John needed money. So he decided to rob Jesse on a Friday. John told his plan to other people. He told his half-brother Mark McConnell. He told his cousin Aaron Bilton Jr. He said he was going to knock off Jesse. That meant he was going to rob him. John said Mark would get $100 for helping. He also promised Mark a bag of marijuana and some money. John planned to do the robbery at noon on a Friday. But Aaron Bilton had to be at work at 11 a.m. So John agreed to do it earlier in the morning. The day before the crime, John told Aaron again that he was going to knock off Jesse today. He had already talked to Mark. On the morning of the crime, which was January 20th, 1989, Mark McConnell drove his car to Aaron's house. Mark's car was a green four-door Chevrolet Impala. It was a late 1960s model. Mark arrived between 10:15 and 10:30 a.m. John was with Mark. The three men then drove to Aaron's uncle's house. On the way, John said again that he was going to knock off Jesse today. When they arrived, Aaron went inside his uncle's house to watch television. Mark drove Aaron's aunt somewhere downtown. John did not go inside the house. He stayed outside. Mark came back 5 minutes later. Then the three men drove to Jesse's Tortilla Factory. When they arrived, John gave instructions. He told Aaron to go inside the store first. Aaron was supposed to see if Jesse was alone. Aaron went inside. He tried to buy corn tortillas. Jesse said they did not have any. Aaron came back to the car. He told John that Jesse was the only person inside. John then told Aaron to go back inside. He told Aaron to buy flour tortillas instead. That way Aaron could make sure again that Jesse was alone. Aaron went back in. He bought the flour tortillas. He came back and told John that Jesse was still alone. Now John was ready. He put on a dark stocking cap. The cap was blue or black. He told Mark to let him out of the car. Then Mark was supposed to drive around the block and park on 12th Street. John got out of the car. He was carrying a small handgun. It was a .25 caliber pistol. Some people call this type of gun a Saturday night special because it is small and easy to hide. John walked to the front door of Jesse's Tortilla Factory. He pulled the stocking cap down over his face like a mask. He went inside. He pointed the gun at Jesse. He demanded money. Jesse did not want to give up his money. He was a hard-working man. He had raised 6 children with his wife. He had built his business from nothing. So Jesse fought back. He picked up a trash can. He threw it at John. He threw other items as well. John started shooting. He fired the gun multiple times. 4 of the bullets hit Jesse. 1 bullet hit Jesse in the mouth. Another bullet hit him in the chest. Jesse fell to the floor. He was bleeding heavily. But he was still conscious. He was still alive. John did not get any money. He ran out of the store. He was still holding his stocking cap. The cap appeared to have something inside it. He walked back to where Mark had parked the car. He got into the back seat. He laid down. He said, "I didn't get anything." Then he told Mark to drive away. Mark drove the green Chevrolet away from the scene. Aaron Bilton was still in the car. They dropped Aaron off at his work. After that, John did not see Aaron again until much later. Back at the tortilla factory, Jesse was badly hurt. He was spitting up blood. He was in pain, but he managed to call his daughter on the telephone. Her name was Gloria Contreras Diaz. He told her to come to the store. A man named Victor Macias also arrived at the store around that time. He had come to cash a check. Before he went inside, he saw an African-American man walking toward a green car. The man was carrying a black object in his hand. Victor did not know it yet, but that was John leaving the scene. Victor then went inside the store. He saw blood on the floor. He saw Jesse running toward the side of the building. Victor went back outside and saw the green car speeding away. He saw the driver and one man in the back seat. Then Gloria Contreras Diaz arrived. Her mother, Esther Contreras, was already there. Jesse told his wife and daughter what had happened. He said an African-American man with a mask tried to steal his money. He said he threw a trash can at the man. Then the man shot him. Jesse also said the gunman didn't get one red cent. That meant the robber left with no money. Jesse was taken to a hospital. He had been shot multiple times. He stayed in the hospital for 27 days. Doctors tried to save him, but his wounds were too severe. On February 16, 1989, Jesse Contreras died from his gunshot wounds. Meanwhile, people in the neighborhood had noticed things. A mechanic named Vincent Gillum had seen Mark's green car that morning. He saw John get out of the car and ask for .25 caliber bullets. Later, after the shooting, Vincent heard ambulance sirens. 10 to 15 minutes later, he saw the same green car drive by very fast. John's aunt also noticed something. A few days after the shooting, she asked John if he had been at Jesse's tortilla factory. She accused him of being there when Jesse was shot. John denied it. He said no one was there when he left. Then he threatened her. He said if she went to the police, he would harm her. Another relative of John's told his boss that he had heard John planning to rob Jesse's tortilla factory. He said he had begged John not to do it because Jesse was a good man. The police had not arrested anyone yet, but they had started to collect information. A detective named Price from the Waco Police Department talked to Jesse in the hospital. Jesse gave a description of the shooter, an African-American male, small build, about 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 7 inches tall, wearing a black ski mask. Detective Price also talked to Victor Macias, who had seen the green car. Victor gave a description of the car. Vincent Gillum also gave the license plate number of the green Chevrolet. 4 days after the crime, Detective Price saw Mark McConnell driving that same green car, but no arrest was made at that time. The investigation was still in its early stages. After Jesse Contreras died on February 16, 1989, the police investigation moved forward. Detective Price of the Waco Police Department already had information from witnesses. He knew the shooter was an African-American male of small build. He knew the getaway car was a green late 1960s Chevrolet Impala with a specific license plate number. He had seen Mark McConnell driving that car 4 days after the shooting. On February 23, 1989, a grand jury indicted John Albert Burks for capital murder. Capital murder means the killing happened during another serious crime, in this case, robbery. The indictment was filed in McLennan County, Texas. A warrant was issued for John's arrest. Detective Price learned that John sometimes lived in Harlingen, Texas. Harlingen is in the Rio Grande Valley, about 370 miles south of Waco. So Price contacted the police in Harlingen. He told them about the warrant. In the first week of March 1989, 2 Harlingen police officers were on patrol. They saw a man walking on a sidewalk in the western part of the city. The man was John Albert Burks. The officers drove up behind him. One officer, Detective Davila, called John's name and identified himself as police. John immediately ran away. Davila chased John on foot, but John got away at first. Another officer, Detective Saldivar, kept looking. She saw John hiding in someone's garage. When John saw Saldivar, he started running again. Saldivar chased him to a fenced area. John tried to climb over the fence. Saldivar drew her weapon and told him to stop. Davila arrived a short time later. The officers took John into custody. John was arrested and brought back to Waco to stand trial. His trial began in July 1989. The prosecutor presented evidence from many witnesses. Aaron Bilton, John's cousin, testified for the state. Bilton had been given immunity. That meant he could not be prosecuted for his role in the crime. He told the jury everything: how John planned the robbery, how Bilton went inside the store twice to check if Jesse was alone, how John wore a stocking cap and carried a gun, and how John returned to the car saying he got nothing. Other witnesses corroborated Bilton's testimony. Victor Macias testified about seeing a man with a black object walking to a green car. Vincent Gillum testified that John asked him for .25 caliber bullets on the morning of the shooting. Johnny Cruz, the grocer, testified that John asked for .25 caliber bullets 1 week before the crime. Ike Weeks testified that John asked him to join a robbery and later asked for bullets. Lewis McConnell testified that he saw a small pistol and a dark stocking cap in his house, and that John left with them. A firearms expert testified that 2 bullets removed from Jesse's body were .25 caliber and were fired from the same gun, probably a Raven Arms pistol. For other spent bullets found at the crime scene were also .25 caliber. 5 spent shell casings were found. The casings came from 3 different manufacturers, which meant the ammunition came from different sources. Gloria Contreras Diaz, Jesse's daughter, testified about what her father told her before he died. Esther Contreras, Jesse's wife, also testified. John's own aunt testified that a few days after the shooting, she accused John of being there, and he threatened her. John's half-brother Mark McConnell did not testify. He refused an immunity deal. He was later convicted of robbery and burglary for his role and received a 40-year prison sentence. Aaron Bilton walked free because of his immunity. The jury found John Albert Burks guilty of capital murder on July 11, 1989. Then the same jury heard evidence during a separate punishment phase. The prosecutor presented John's prior criminal history: 2 burglary convictions, the assault on the tow truck driver in 1981, the theft of his former spouse's van in 1988, the attack on the man who intervened, and the threat to kill a man who owed him money. The prosecutor also presented evidence that John had admitted to committing a murder in Waco in August 1982 during a burglary of a Texaco station. That was the stabbing death of the service station attendant Warner, for which charges had been dropped. The jury answered 2 special questions required by Texas law. They answered yes to both. That meant the jury found that John would be a future danger to society and that there were no sufficient mitigating circumstances. The trial judge then sentenced John to death. John appealed automatically to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. That court affirmed his conviction and sentence on March 9, 1994. John then filed a state habeas corpus petition. After an evidentiary hearing, the trial court recommended denying relief. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals agreed and denied relief on October 16, 1996. John then filed a federal habeas petition in the United States District Court for the Western District of Texas. The district court denied relief on March 4, 1998. John appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Fifth Circuit affirmed the denial of relief on January 7, 2000. The United States Supreme Court refused to hear his case. On June 14, 2000, John Albert Burks was scheduled to be executed by lethal injection at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in Huntsville, Texas. On the day before, a federal district judge issued a reprieve, saying a previous order still blocked the execution. But on the day of the execution, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals lifted that reprieve. The United States Supreme Court refused to stop the execution. John ate a final meal: fried chicken, a pound of bacon, and a 16-ounce steak. He made a brief final statement. He told his family witnesses that everything was going to be all right. He said, "The Raiders are going all the way, y'all." Then he told the warden, "It's going down, let's get it over with." The lethal injection was started at 6:09 p.m. John took a shallow breath, then a deep breath, then a shallow breath. He stopped breathing. He was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m. on June 14, 2000. He was 44 years old. After the execution, an investigator hired by the defense told reporters that John had admitted to him that he threw the gun into the Gulf of Mexico. The investigator said he kept that information secret until after the execution, so it would not hurt John's legal appeals. Jesse Contreras' family did not celebrate. His daughter Gloria said the execution was a closing to a horrible chapter. Esther Contreras, Jesse's widow, said she held no grudge. She said she thought John was lying when he claimed he was innocent. The tortilla factory continued to be run by one of Jesse's daughters and her family. The case of John Albert Burks ended on June 14, 2000, when he was executed for the murder of Jesse Contreras, a hard-working man who died protecting the money he had earned. Story 5. William Clifford Bryson was born on July 11, 1970, in the state of Oklahoma. His family called him Clifford. He did not use his first name William very often. His parents were working-class people. They lived in a regular neighborhood in Oklahoma City. The family did not have a lot of money, but they had a home and food on the table. Bryson's mother and father raised him like most parents in that area. There are no public records of any serious problems in his childhood home. He was not known to be a violent child. He did not get into serious trouble with the law when he was young. He went to public schools in Oklahoma City. Teachers saw him as a normal student. He was not the best in class, but he was not the worst either. He showed up to school most days and did enough work to pass. As a teenager, Bryson grew to be about average height and build. He liked sports. He played basketball and football with his friends after school. He also liked to read. He read books and magazines for fun. Later in his teenage years, he started writing poetry. He made greeting cards by hand as a hobby. He gave some of these cards to friends. People who knew him said he could be friendly and talkative when he wanted to be. He also had a quiet side. He did not always share his feelings with others. Bryson had friends in his neighborhood and at school. One of his friends was a boy named Clinton Eugene McKimball. They were the same age. They spent time together doing normal teenage things. They listened to music. They hung out at each other's houses. They talked about girls and jobs and what they wanted to do with their lives. Bryson did not have a serious girlfriend for most of his high school years. He was more focused on having fun with his friends. Bryson finished high school. After that, he did not go to college. He needed to earn money, so he took small jobs here and there. He worked for short periods of time at different places. He did not stay in one job for very long. He did not have a clear plan for his future. He spent his free time with McKimball and other friends. They would drive around Oklahoma City. They would get food at convenience stores. They would drink beer and talk late into the night. By the summer of 1988, Bryson had just turned 18 years old. He was legally an adult. He still lived in the Oklahoma City area. He still spent time with McKimball. He did not have a steady job at that moment. He did not have a lot of money. He was a young man with no direction. He was looking for something to change in his life. He did not know that change was coming very soon. In the summer of 1988, Bryson met a woman named Marilyn K. Plants. She was 27 years old. She was married to a man named James Plants. James was 33 years old. He worked as a pressroom supervisor at the Daily Oklahoma newspaper. He worked the night shift. He went to work in the evening and came home early in the morning. Marilyn Plants was a homemaker. She stayed home with her 2 children. The children were a girl named Trina, age 9, and a boy named Christopher, age 6. She also taught Sunday school at a church. From the outside, her marriage looked normal. But Marilyn started a romantic relationship with Bryson. He was 18 years old. She was 27. They became lovers. Marilyn told Bryson that her husband beat her. She said she came to him with black eyes and bruises. She said her husband had threatened to kill himself and her if she tried to divorce him. Bryson believed her. He loved Marilyn. He wanted to help her. Marilyn also told Bryson about money. James Plants had 2 life insurance policies. The total value of these policies was about $319,000. Marilyn was the person who would get that money if James died. She wanted that money. She told Bryson that she wanted her husband dead. She said the death had to look like an accident, so the insurance company would pay. Bryson agreed to help kill James Plants. He brought in his friend Clinton McKimball. McKimball was also 18 years old. Marilyn promised to pay McKimball $45,000 for his help. She did not promise a specific amount to Bryson because she and Bryson planned to be together after James was dead. They planned to move out of state and get married. The 3 of them made a first plan. Marilyn suggested they drive up next to James's pickup truck on the highway and shoot him. She gave Bryson a gun to use. But Bryson did not shoot anyone. Instead, he took the gun to a pawn shop and sold it for money. That first plan failed. Then Marilyn suggested a different plan. She said they should catch James coming home from work in the morning. They would beat him with baseball bats. Then they would set him and his truck on fire. The fire would make the death look like an accident. Marilyn got 2 baseball bats from her son's room. She gave them to Bryson and McKimball. She told them to hide inside her house and wait for James to come home. Before the final attack, Bryson tried to hire another man named Roderick Ferris to do the killing. Bryson offered Ferris $40,000, then later $10,000. Bryson introduced Ferris to Marilyn at a grocery store. Marilyn told Ferris that the murder would have to look like an accident. Ferris did not take the job. He was arrested on an unrelated charge and went to jail. On the night of August 25, 1988, Bryson and McKimball went to Marilyn's house. Marilyn had just quit her job that day. Earlier, she had taken money from the bank and spent some of it on cocaine and beer. That evening, she went to her bedroom at about 10:30 p.m. and went to sleep. Her 2 children were already asleep in their beds. Bryson and McKimball stayed in the living room. They drank beer. They smoked cocaine. They stayed awake until about 11:30 p.m. Then they fell asleep on the couch and floor. At about 4 a.m. on August 26, 1988, James Plants finished his night shift at the newspaper. He drove home. He stopped at a store to buy groceries. He put the bag of food in his arms. He walked to his front door. He put his key in the lock and opened the door. He stepped inside his own home. He was whistling. The sound of the key in the lock woke Bryson and McKimball. They hid on opposite sides of the house. Bryson picked up one baseball bat. McKimball picked up the other. James Plants walked into his living room. He did not see anyone at first. Then Bryson swung the bat and hit James on the head. James fell down. He cried out for his wife. He said Marilyn. Bryson hit him again. McKimball ran over and started hitting James with his bat too. James tried to get back up. He would not stay down on the floor. So the 2 men kept hitting him over and over. They hit him many times with the baseball bats. Finally, James stopped moving. He was on the floor. He was bleeding from his head. He was badly hurt, but he was still alive. He was moaning in pain. The noise woke Marilyn. She got out of bed. She came into the living room. She looked at her husband on the floor. She saw that his head was busted open. She said that it did not look like an accident. Then she told Bryson and McKimball what to do next. She said burn him. Bryson and McKimball picked up James Plants from the floor. They carried him outside. They put him on the ground next to his pickup truck. Marilyn came outside. She handed Bryson the keys to the truck. Then she went back inside the house. Bryson and McKimble lifted James into the back of the pickup truck. Bryson got into the driver's seat. He started the truck. McKimble got into Marilyn's car. They drove to a deserted area in northeast Oklahoma City. It was a remote place along the route James would have taken to work. There were no houses or people nearby. Bryson stopped the truck. He and McKimble took James out of the back. They put him inside the cab of the truck. They sat him behind the steering wheel. His body slumped over to the side. His left leg hung out of the open driver's side door and rested flat on the ground. McKimble took a rag. He put the rag into the gas tank of the truck. He tried to light the rag on fire. The rag did not catch. The fire did not start. So Bryson took a container of gasoline. He poured gasoline all over James Plantz's body. He poured gasoline inside the cab of the truck. Then he lit the gasoline. The truck caught on fire. The flames spread quickly. Bryson and McKimble got into Marilyn's car and drove away. As they drove, they turned around to look back. Through the fire and smoke, they saw James Plantz raise his body up inside the burning truck. He was still alive when the fire started. He died from the combination of the head injuries from the baseball bats and the burns from the fire. The two men drove back to Marilyn's house. Marilyn was cleaning up the blood from the living room floor. She gave Bryson and McKimble some of her dead husband's clothes to wear. She put their bloody clothes into a sack. The men took the sack and drove to a river. They threw the bloody clothes into the water. Bryson took money from James Plantz's trousers. He and McKimble went to a convenience store. They bought sandwiches and drinks with that money. Then McKimble went home to take a bath. He told Bryson he could still smell the blood on his body. Bryson went to the home of a friend named Michael Kendrick. Bryson told Kendrick that he had killed James Plantz. He explained all the details. Kendrick noticed spots of blood on the backs of Bryson's hands and on his shoes. Bryson called Marilyn on the phone. He asked if she was okay. Kendrick heard Bryson say to her that they must stay close. Later, McKimble arrived at Kendrick's house. Kendrick heard the two men talking about the killing. They laughed at how James had called out for Marilyn while they were beating him. Bryson also told another friend named Terry Norman that he had killed James Plantz. 2 days after the murder, Bryson told Norman that they had used baseball bats. Bryson said he was going to have money soon. He said he and Marilyn were moving out of town. Bryson told another friend named Derek Jones the same story. He said that he and McKimble had killed James Plantz. He did not try to hide what he had done. He talked openly to his friends about the beating and the fire. On the morning of August 26, 1988, a person driving in northeast Oklahoma City saw a pickup truck on fire. The driver called the fire department. Firefighters arrived and put out the flames. Inside the cab of the truck, they found a dead body. The body was burned badly. The driver's side door was open. One leg of the body was outside the truck, resting flat on the ground. The firefighters called the police. Police investigators came to the scene. They saw that the body had injuries to the head that did not come from the fire. The head injuries happened before the fire started. The police knew this was not an accident. Someone had hurt this man and then set him on fire. They treated the case as a murder. The body was taken to the medical examiner's office. An autopsy was performed. The medical examiner used dental records to identify the body. The dead man was James Earl Plantz, age 33. The cause of death was listed as a combination of blunt force injury to the head and thermal injuries from the fire. Both things together killed him. The head injury came first from being hit with a hard object. Then the fire burned him while he was still alive. Police started asking questions about James Plantz. They talked to his co-workers at the Daily Oklahoman. They learned that he had just finished his night shift and driven home. They went to his house in Midwest City. They talked to his wife, Marilyn Plantz. She told police that her marriage was perfect. She said she had no idea who would want to hurt her husband. But the police noticed things that did not match her story. The police also learned about the life insurance policies. 2 policies totaled about $319,000. Marilyn Plants was the person who would get that money if James died. That gave her a reason to want him dead. On Monday, August 29, 1988, police arrested Marilyn Plants. They charged her with murder. Investigators believed she had paid someone to kill her husband. On Tuesday, August 30, 1988, police arrested William Clifford Bryson. He was 18 years old. They charged him with conspiracy to commit murder. While Bryson was in a holding cell waiting to be booked, he tried to hang himself with his shoelaces. Jail officers found him and stopped him. They took him to a local hospital for treatment. Then they brought him back to the jail. After he was booked on the charges, officers put him in an isolation cell. They watched him closely. Bryson then tried to drown himself in the toilet. He did not succeed. He was not seriously injured. Also on Tuesday, August 30, 1988, police arrested Clinton Eugene McKimble. He was also 18 years old. He was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. On Wednesday, August 31, 1988, all 3 were charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors announced that they would seek the death penalty against Marilyn Plants and William Bryson. On October 20, 1988, prosecutors made a deal with Clinton McKimble. McKimble agreed to plead guilty to murder. In exchange, he would receive a sentence of life in prison. He also agreed to testify against Marilyn Plants and William Bryson at their trials. McKimble told the court everything that happened. He described how Marilyn gave them the bats. He described the beating. He described how Marilyn told them to burn James. He described putting James in the truck and setting it on fire. His testimony became a key piece of evidence. A preliminary hearing was held for Bryson and Plants. Another man named Roderick Ferris testified. He told the court that Marilyn Plants had said the murder would have to look like an accident. He also said Bryson had told him that Marilyn called him crying because her husband had beaten her. The police had made a videotaped recording of Bryson's confession. In that video, Bryson told police how he and McKimble beat James Plants. He said that while he was beating James, he was thinking about all the times Marilyn came to him with black eyes and crying. He said he loved Marilyn Plants. He also said Marilyn told him that her husband had threatened to kill himself and her if she divorced him. Marilyn Plants denied everything. She told police her marriage was perfect. She said she had no role in the killing. Bryson's lawyers asked for a separate trial. They said that Bryson and Plants had defenses that did not agree with each other. The judge, Charles Owens, said no. The judge ruled that they would be tried together. The trial happened in March 1989. The jury heard all the evidence. They heard McKimble's testimony. They saw the videotape of Bryson's confession. They heard from friends who Bryson had told about the killing. They heard about the life insurance money. Neither Bryson nor Marilyn Plants testified in their own defense. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. They found both Marilyn Plants and William Bryson guilty of first-degree murder. They also found them guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, of recruiting others to help, and of arson for burning the pickup truck. The next day, the jury had to decide the punishment. They deliberated for 5 hours. They voted to give the death penalty to both Marilyn Plants and William Bryson. The judge also gave them additional sentences: 100 years in prison for recruiting others to help in the murder, 10 years for conspiracy to commit murder, and 15 years for burning the pickup truck. But the death sentence was the main punishment. Bryson spent the next 11 years on death row. He filed appeals. His lawyers argued that the trial had problems. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed his case in 1994 and said the conviction and death sentence were correct. Bryson filed more appeals. He asked federal courts to stop his execution. The 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals reviewed his case in 1999 and also said no. On June 6, 2000, Bryson had a clemency hearing before the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board. Clemency means asking for mercy, so the execution is stopped and the sentence is changed to life in prison. Bryson spoke to the board. He said that asking for clemency was impossible because 3 of the 5 board members were appointed by the governor, and the governor supported the death penalty. He did not present any witnesses to speak for him. The board voted 4-0 to deny clemency. On June 15, 2000, William Clifford Bryson was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. He was 29 years old. He had spent 11 years on death row. His last meal was 10 fried shrimp, a salad, a strawberry drink, a slice of German chocolate cake, a pint of ice cream, and a hot apple fritter. 13 relatives and friends of James Plants watched the execution. They included James's 2 sisters, his father, and his brother. His sister Karen Lowry said after the execution that it was a no-win situation and nobody wins in the end. His other sister Sharon Cotton said that Marilyn Plants and Clifford Bryson had lived almost 12 years since James was murdered, which was 12 years longer than her brother lived. Clinton McKimball, who testified against Bryson and Plants, served his life sentence in prison. Marilyn K. Plants remained on death row. She was executed by lethal injection in Oklahoma on May 1, 2001. The 2 children of James and Marilyn Plants, Trina and Christopher, were ages 9 and 6 when their father was killed in their own home while they slept. They were raised by other family members after their mother was sent to death row and later executed. The case of William Clifford Bryson ended on June 15, 2000, when he became the 645th person executed in the United States since 1976, and the 28th person executed in Oklahoma since that same year. Story 6. Paul Celso Nuncio was born on October 20, 1968. His family lived in Frederick, Oklahoma. Frederick is a small town about 65 miles northwest of Wichita Falls. Not much is known publicly about his parents or his early childhood. Paul did not stay in school for a long time. He left school after completing the 8th grade. He never went back to finish high school or get a diploma. After leaving school, he needed to find work. At some point, he got a job as a security guard. He worked at a milling company in that role. Paul developed problems with drugs and alcohol. These problems started years before the events that would later define his life. He used drugs often. He drank alcohol heavily. People who knew him said he drank all the time. His drug and alcohol use affected his behavior and his choices. Paul also had a criminal record before the main events of this story. In 1990, he was convicted of felony theft. A felony is a serious crime. After that conviction, he was put on probation. Probation meant he had to follow rules and stay out of trouble. But he did not follow the rules well. His probation officer, a man named Jim DeWeese, later said Paul was a sorry probationer. The officer said Paul could not keep a real job for very long. The officer also said Paul was dishonest and had a passive-aggressive personality. That means he did not learn to obey rules. Paul also got convicted for misdemeanor thefts later. One misdemeanor theft happened in Hale County, Texas. Another happened in Tarrant County, Texas. These were smaller thefts than the felony, but they still showed a pattern of taking things that did not belong to him. At some point, Paul lived with a woman named Elsa Martinez. She stayed with him for about 2.5 to 3 years. Together, they had 2 children. Elsa later said that Paul had a bad temper when he was drunk. She said he was drunk all the time. She also said that Paul struck her once. That meant he hit her. Paul used drugs heavily. He later described himself as an addict. He also said that he had been molested as a child. That was something he carried with him from his early years. But he did not talk about it often. By the early 1990s, Paul was a young man in his 20s. He lived in or around Plainview, Texas. He had friends and acquaintances in the area. He went out drinking at clubs. He knew people like Isabel Barrios, Oralia Medrano, Efren Garcia, Enrique Navarro, Angela Ruiz, and Olga Villalon. He would spend time with them. He also knew a woman named Patricia Lopez. He had a habit of staying out late. He did not have steady work. He continued to use drugs and alcohol. He continued to steal things to get money. He was on probation, but he did not change his behavior. One thing about Paul was that he could seem normal to people at first. But when he drank, his temper came out. He could become violent. Elsa Martinez saw this side of him. His probation officer saw that he did not follow rules. Paul had trouble keeping jobs. He had trouble staying out of trouble. His life was moving in a direction that would lead to something terrible. But that part of the story has not happened yet. The night of December 2nd, 1993, Paul Nuncio went out drinking with a group of friends. The group included Isabel Barrios, Oralia Medrano, Efren Garcia, Enrique Navarro, Angela Ruiz, and Olga Villalon. They went to clubs in Plainview, Texas. They drank alcohol and stayed out late. Shortly after midnight, the group got a ride from a relative of one of the people in the group. They drove around for a while looking for someone who sold alcohol illegally. Then the car stopped on Beach Street. An argument started between Paul and the driver. The driver got angry. He stopped the car and made Paul and the others get out. It was pouring rain. The rain was very heavy. The group ran to the nearest porch to get out of the rain. That porch belonged to a house at 708 Beach Street. A 61-year-old woman named Pauline Crownover Ferris lived in that house alone. She was inside at the time. It was after midnight, so she was likely asleep. One person in the group, Oralia Medrano, used to rent a small house behind the victim's house. Paul had visited Medrano often during that time, so Paul knew who Pauline Ferris was. He later said he had not really ever met her, but he knew she lived there. The group stayed on the porch for a while. Some people later said it was only 10 to 15 minutes. Others said it was as long as 1.5 to 2 hours. While they stood there, they talked loudly and made noise. None of them saw any lights turn on inside the house. None of them heard any sounds from inside. Several people knocked on the front door or the back door. No one answered. At one point, Paul left the porch. He went to Pauline Ferris's car, which was parked in her driveway. He tried to start the car without a key. This is called hot wiring. He tried to steal the car, but he could not get it to start. Then the rain became lighter. The rest of the group decided to leave. One person asked Paul where he was going. Paul did not answer. Everyone else left the porch. Paul stayed behind. People in the group later said that Paul was not drunk at the time they left. He was not acting confused or unsteady. Now Paul was alone on the porch. He decided to break into the house. He believed no one was home because no one had answered the door earlier. He went to the back door. He forced it open. He entered the house. But Pauline Ferris was inside. She saw Paul. They began fighting. Paul hit her. He kicked her. He kept knocking her down. He kept hitting her until she stopped trying to get up. He beat her face so badly that she later became unrecognizable. He used his hands and possibly a blunt object. The top of her scalp had many bruises from a blunt object. Paul then took 2 television sets, a stereo, a VCR, and some jewelry. He put the television sets and the stereo on the front porch. He put the rings in his pocket. Then he looked back at Pauline Ferris. He saw that she was naked. Her clothing had been removed during the fight. He decided to have sex with her. He forced her legs apart. He raped her. After that, he strangled her with his hands. He squeezed her neck until she stopped breathing. Paul later said he did not mean to kill her. He said he did not know she was dead at the time. But he had beaten her, raped her, and choked her. She died on the living room floor. She was lying face down. Her top was pulled up around her shoulders. Her pants and underwear were next to her right foot. Her bottom denture plate was lying several feet away under a coffee table. Her top denture plate was still in her mouth. A vacuum cleaner was next to her body, with the cord under her. After Paul left the house, he went to a motel called the Warwick Inn. This was between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning on December 3rd. He sold a television to a man for $50. The man saw blood on Paul's shirt and arm. Paul gave an explanation. He said he had been helping a friend with some sheep. He said one of the sheep was pregnant. That was a lie. About 45 minutes later, Paul came back to the same motel room. He brought a camera, a stereo, and some rings. The man did not want to buy the rings, so Paul threw the rings into a trash can nearby. The man asked Paul to write a receipt for the sale. Paul wrote a receipt. To confirm his identity, Paul showed the man his driver's license. He also wrote his license number on the receipt. Later that morning, around 4:25 a.m., a police officer saw Paul standing on a street corner. The officer thought it was strange for someone to be there at that time. But the officer did not arrest Paul. He only talked to him and then gave him a ride to some apartments. Paul then met an acquaintance named Kenneth Brooks. Paul asked Brooks to take him to his house to pick up a television. Paul directed Brooks to the house on Beach Street, Pauline Ferris's house. Paul picked up another television from the porch. Then he asked Brooks to take him to the Warwick Inn again. He tried to sell that television, but the buyer noticed fresh blood on Paul's arm. No sale happened. Between 5 o'clock and 5:30 a.m., Paul went to the airport motel. His friends Enrique Navarro and Angela Ruiz were staying there. Paul asked Navarro if he wanted to go drinking. Navarro said no. Paul left. Angela Ruiz later said Paul was all drunk at that time. That was different from earlier on the porch, when he was not drunk. Around 6:30 a.m., Paul went to the motel room of his friend Patricia Lopez. He offered to sell her a television. She told him to come back later when her husband was home. Paul later sold that television to a friend of Olga Villalon. Later, Patricia Lopez saw Paul again. She noticed what looked like blood on his boot. She asked him about it. Paul did not answer. He just stared at her and left. Then he came back while Lopez was talking to her mother. He started cleaning his boot. He said it was not blood. He said it was ketchup. That was another lie. Around 11 o'clock in the morning on December 3rd, neighbors of Pauline Ferris went to her house. They found her dead on the living room floor. She had been badly beaten. She was naked from the waist down. Her face was unrecognizable. The neighbors called for help. That same afternoon, Paul tried to get a loan from the Sun Loan Company. He asked for $150. He said he would use a TV, a VCR, a stereo, and a four-wheeler as collateral. First he told the loan officer he needed money for newborn stuff. But he also wrote on the application that he was single. The loan officer asked him about this. Paul then admitted he really wanted money for a trip. He said he thought he would not get the loan if he told the truth. He also wrote on the application that he worked at a place called M&S Videos. That was a lie. He had never worked there. The loan company refused to give him the money. Paul continued to move around Plainview. He had stolen items from Pauline Ferris's house. He had sold some of them. He had blood on his clothes and boots. He had lied to multiple people about where the items came from and why he had blood on him. And Pauline Ferris was dead on her living room floor, discovered by her neighbors. On December 3rd, 1993, around 11 o'clock in the morning, Pauline Ferris's neighbors found her body. They saw her lying face down on her living room floor. She was nude from the waist down. Her face was badly beaten and unrecognizable. The neighbors called the Plainview police immediately. Police officers arrived at 708 Beach Street. They saw signs of a struggle. The house had been ransacked. Furniture was moved. Items were missing. The officers collected evidence from the scene. They found the victim's dentures on the floor. They saw bruises all over her body. They noted that her rings were missing. The medical examiner would later confirm she died from strangulation. The police needed to find who did this. They did not have a suspect right away. For 2 days, they worked on the case. They talked to neighbors. They looked for anyone who had been seen near the house that night. On December 5, 1993, the police received an anonymous tip. Someone called and gave them a name. That name was Paul Nunzio. The tip said Paul might be involved in the murder. Later, it was discovered that the tip came from Olga Villalone. She had been part of the group on the porch that night. She had become suspicious of Paul's behavior after the murder. The police now had a suspect. They started looking for Paul. They also started looking for stolen items. On December 6th, police recovered a television. They showed it to Pauline Ferris's daughter. The daughter identified the television as belonging to her mother. That was the evidence the police needed to get a warrant. A judge issued a warrant for Paul Nunzio's arrest. On December 8, 1993, police found Paul. He was hiding in a closet inside a house in Plainview. They arrested him and took him to the Plainview Police Department. At the police station, officers read Paul his rights. He had the right to remain silent. He had the right to a lawyer. Paul said he understood his rights. He agreed to talk without a lawyer present. He gave both an oral statement and a written statement. In his statement, Paul admitted he broke into the house. He said he was messed up on drugs and alcohol that night. He said he wanted to steal things to sell for drug money. He admitted he did not think anyone was home. But then he saw Pauline Ferris. They fought. He hit her, kicked her, and knocked her down repeatedly until she stopped getting up. He admitted he took 2 televisions, a stereo, and some rings. He also admitted he looked at her, saw she was naked, and decided to have sex with her. That meant he raped her. He did not admit to strangling her on purpose. He said he did not know she was dead until later. But the medical evidence showed strangulation. After Paul gave his confession, police asked for permission to search a house in Plainview where Paul had been staying. The police found clothing and boots that Paul wore on the night of the murder. There was blood on one of the boots. A DNA test was done on that blood sample. The results showed a 98.8% probability that the blood matched Pauline Ferris. That meant it was almost certainly her blood. The police also talked to many witnesses. The people from the group that night gave statements. The man who bought the first television gave a statement and showed the receipt with Paul's driver's license number. Patricia Lopez said she saw blood on Paul's boot. Kenneth Brooks said Paul took him to his house, which was actually the victim's house, to pick up a television. The loan officer said Paul lied about his job and his reason for needing money. On December 21, 1993, a grand jury in Hale County indicted Paul Nunzio for capital murder. The indictment said he killed Pauline Ferris while committing burglary, aggravated sexual assault, and robbery. Those are all serious crimes. When a murder happens during one of those crimes, Texas law allows the death penalty. Paul pleaded not guilty. His trial took place in the 64th District Court of Hale County, Texas. The trial started in early 1995. The prosecutors presented all the evidence. They showed Paul's confession. They showed the DNA match. They showed the stolen televisions. They showed the receipt with his driver's license number. They called witnesses from that night. They called the man who bought the television. They called Patricia Lopez. They called the loan officer. They called the medical examiner, who explained the bruises and the strangulation. The defense tried to argue that Paul did not mean to kill her. They pointed out that he was high on drugs and alcohol. They noted that he had been molested as a child. But the evidence against him was very strong. On March 2, 1995, the jury found Paul Nunzio guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury had to decide if Paul should get life in prison or the death penalty. The prosecutors showed that Paul had a criminal history. They showed his felony theft conviction from 1990. They showed his misdemeanor thefts. They called his former probation officer, who said Paul was dishonest and would not follow rules. They called Elsa Martinez, who said Paul had a bad temper and had hit her. The jury answered two special questions. The first question was whether Paul would be a future danger to society. The jury said yes. The second question was whether there were any circumstances that made life in prison a better punishment than death. The jury said no. Under Texas law at that time, those answers required a death sentence. On June 30th, 1995, the trial judge sentenced Paul Nuncio to death by lethal injection. He was sent to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to await execution. Paul appealed his conviction. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the conviction on February 5, 1997. That means they agreed with the trial court. Paul then filed a state habeas corpus petition. A habeas petition asks a court to review whether the imprisonment is legal. The trial court held an evidentiary hearing on March 3, 6, 8, and April 1st and 7th, 1998. The court recommended denying relief. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals agreed on September 23, 1998. Paul then filed a federal habeas petition on March 1, 1999. The federal district court denied it on May 13, 1999. Paul tried to appeal to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. That court denied permission to appeal on January 24, 2000. A request for rehearing was denied on February 18, 2000. On June 15, 2000, Paul Nuncio was scheduled to be executed. His execution was set for after 6 p.m. in Huntsville, Texas. His lawyers filed last-minute appeals. The U.S. Supreme Court reviewed the appeals 3 times that evening. Each time, the court ruled against Paul. The execution was delayed by about 1 hour. At 7:17 p.m., Paul Nuncio was pronounced dead. In his final statement, he said he was sorry that Pauline Ferris was murdered. But he insisted he did not commit the crime. He told her children not to feel guilty if they had executed an innocent man. He recited the Lord's Prayer. Then he said the victim's mother might greet him in heaven, and that the children would later know if he was innocent or guilty. The lethal injection took effect. He coughed twice, then sputtered and gasped. 7 minutes later, he was dead. Pauline Ferris's children, Becky Ferris Payne and Eddie Ferris, watched the execution through a window. Becky said she did not believe her mother would reach out her hand to Paul in heaven. Eddie said Paul received more chances than his mother ever got. Paul Nuncio was 31 years old. He was the 22nd person executed in Texas in the year 2000 and the 646th person executed in the United States since 1976. The case of Paul Celso Nuncio ended on June 15, 2000, when he was put to death for the brutal murder of Pauline Crownover Ferris. But her family continues to carry the loss of the night a stranger stayed behind on her porch.